Hello, once again, it's Matt Brynildson, Craig Thomas, Ollie Razi in the Theater of Barrels, working our way through the anniversary box for the Brewmaster Collective Club. This will be the fourth beer that we've tasted out of the five, so if we're all a little rosy-cheeked and smiling, you'll know why. But this beer, being a black label beer, is another special beer in the pack, Run P.N.C. And I've got to tell a little bit of the story, but I always got to pour these guys some beer first. The P.N.C. project started long ago. It's timely that we're pouring it today because we're filming this on the week of GABF. And it was at GABF well over 10 years ago that we were approached by the P.N.C., which is the Publican National Committee. It's a group of publicans here in the United States, across the country, which include Monk's Cafe on the East Coast and Fergie's. It includes the Tornado, these famous beer bars, Apex in the Pacific Northwest, Brower's Cafe. It includes Horse Brass and rest in peace, Denver's Falling Rock. And so these are some of the greatest beer bars, and really what I would call the first generation of publicans who really brought craft to the table, had their bars focus on craft. And so many of us brewers owe those bars so much because they are the prophets who taught people about craft beer. It didn't matter how much beer we made and what we made. If we couldn't find publicans to pour it, we had nothing. So cheers to those guys. Cheers. And basically what happened was that we brewed a beer. They came to us at GABF. We had a big stinky dinner with them. They asked us to brew a beer for them. And we had this beautiful gathering where we came up with a recipe. They all flew into Paso Robles. We had some more big stinky dinners, probably drank a lot of beer and booze, and came up with this incredible beer, which is a buckwheat stout. Buckwheat's not really easy to source, but it is a unique grain in brewing. And we wanted to age it in tequila barrels. I remember, having to navigate and find those barrels was quite difficult. And then we released this beer, and we only released it to the P.N.C. Publicans, only those bars. And there was quite a bit of hype around the beer. It turned out splendidly. Roll the clocks forward, they approached us again, and we asked, and we decided that we would brew it again. And unfortunately, about the time we were needing to release that beer, COVID hit. And a lot of those bars, had to shut down or really downsize. They weren't able to take the beer, so the beer had an extended aging. And long and the short of it was there was a little bit left over from all of that. And we called them up and said, hey, could we re-release a very small amount of it to our club, adjunct it, make it special, make it different than what we released to those bars, and share it with the club. So this is really a special beer, and out of COVID, a couple of those bars had to close. Not all these guys are around. So it's really special liquid. So why don't you take me through a little bit of the adjuncting logic here, and then we can go through what we're tasting.
You want to start, my friend? Go ahead.
The tasting? The adjuncting logic?
The adjuncting, yeah, I think the thing that we really were trying to do with this beer, because it aged for quite a few years in barrel, was trying to figure out what adjunct might work the best. And especially with the different group of barrels that we used in here, tequila being one of them, what works well with that style barrel, with the actual buckwheat beer that we made that was put into that barrel. And one thing that we kind of decided on was cinnamon could be something that we could use, but cinnamon in a form that wasn't overwhelming, that wasn't so spicy that it almost came off as a chili. So we sourced the cinnamon from a couple different places. What was it? One of them was Singapore, and what was the other cinnamon that we used? Do you remember?
There's
Saigon.
Ceylon.
And Ceylon cinnamon, which Eric P.N.C. was the one who found both of those cinnamons. And very subtle notes in here, but play really well with the overall flavor of the beer you can taste it and you can smell it, but it doesn't build like some cinnamon beers do. It actually just has that retro-nasal aroma that comes through in the actual beer itself.
Right. I think the fantastic thing about cinnamon, and really all spices when you really dig into them, is they're always seen as kind of a singular component. Everybody talks about, experiencing cinnamon in a beer or cinnamon toast crunch or whatever, and it's always defined simply as cinnamon. But when you actually start to smell raw cinnamon and cinnamon in this beer, you start to really explore all the variations of what cinnamon is and what it has to offer. And when I stick my nose into this beer, depending on how I sniff it and what I'm looking for, I get everything from red hots to jalapeno peppers to ancho chilies to vanilla even. Definitely some woody kind of characteristics throughout there. It's really a beer worth exploring in that vein, never mind the rest of the P.N.C backbone and the buck.
I wish we could have sent a straight P.N.C to taste next to it, because I remember the buckwheat bringing a little bit of spiciness to this beer, and tequila barrels, it always bring an interesting spice twist to the beer, and I think that the cinnamon lays in there just perfectly. I'm getting the woody edge of the cinnamon. I'm imagining the cinnamon stick and the barrel wood working really well together, the tannins of those two working well together.
Almost like a fresh pine sawdust kind of character. To me, at least it's not like the oak barrels.
Yeah, and you nailed it. I also feel like it brought a little fresh splash to the beer. Again, it had been sitting in barrel for so long, but it is a pretty robust beer. I don't think that it was bruised by sitting too long. I think it really mellowed well. And we've said this before, but as these beers go through extended aging, the bitterness drops out of the bottom of them. And sometimes it leaves a little bit of a creamier, leaner beer. When they're aged too long, they start to get almost watery and thin, and that's certainly not the case here. And I think the cinnamon really helped, freshen it up, brighten it up a little bit.
The hops didn't drop off in the way that typical barrel-aged beers do either, and I think the cinnamon also helps kind of maybe mute some of those notes that you would get from some of the hops kind of dropping off and almost becoming like pollen-like an aroma with some of the older barrel-aged beers that you get.
Yeah. I'll tell you, it was just such a high honor to be asked by these guys to make the beer so long ago, and the fact that there's these secondary waves coming through. It really brings me a lot of joy.
That was the surliest group that we've ever brewed with.
There were a lot of dice thrown. There were a lot of cigars
smoked in the brewery. That was my favorite. Walking by the bottle line with a big cigar coming through. I was fresh to the scene, and I remember a cigar, and our packaging manager is like, "What is going on right now?"
You can't tell these guys no.
Exactly.
But it's so much fun to hang out with, and they've had such a positive impact on our industry. So, cheers to the P.N.C. once again. I hope you all enjoy this. It's a really special beer.
Cheers to P.N.C. in general here. So.
All right. Cheers.